Ballpark, everybody does it a little bit differently, and that's the good thing.
Right. I'm left-handed, so chalkboards don't work very well for me here. So now we've got our second bug. The way I do it is I will tie a piece of tippet, and I will usually go one size smaller than the tippet that I used to tie to my first bug. The reason for that is probably multifold, because it's easy to say, well, it's a small fly, smaller tippet, but more importantly, you're dredging the bottom, and if that back bug hangs up, and you have to break off, there's a much better chance you're going to keep that top fly if your dropper tippet's a little bit lighter weight than the upper.
You got a fly shop, so
So for me, it's kind of moot, right? Exactly. So yeah, exactly. So use heavy tippet for this.
For you, $2, that's $5. You just
That's right. See, I'm costing myself money.
light it on fire.
So anyway, I'm going to tie that tippet to the hook bed, and then I'm going to tie my smaller bug, my little
Zebra
midge right there. And this distance, in a trout stream, for me, that distance is usually, it does vary a little bit depending on a few factors for me, but I'm usually probably putting that between 10 and probably about 16 inches back. If I'm fishing different situations, like say if I was steelhead fishing, doing the same type, this is very typical steelhead rig, by the way, just on a bigger scale, I would probably have about 24 inches for my dropper, because the bigger fish. One thing you have to be careful of when you're doing a dropper rig is tangling up your fish and foul hooking your fish. It's a great way to lose fish when you're doing a double nymph rig. So to be a little safe, I like to make sure that my trailer is probably at least, if not a little bit longer than the size of the fish I expect to catch. That's just kind of a generalization. Thoughts? Thoughts?
Point fly more often is going to be a bead hit.
Yes or no, but it should be heavier. I mean, the heavier that front fly, the less weight you have to add, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, right. And if our split shot is up there by our lead fly, right, then we're trying to get that lead fly somewhere near the bottom, right? And our second fly is probably weightless or less weight. It could be I fish a little number 20 pheasant tail, lots of times, or a little beadhead pheasant tail that small.
Now, when you're doing this, so you usually have 4 or 5 flies on here, right?
Yeah, the Czechoslovakians, right, in competition. Same thing. You know what? I'll do the same thing. A couple of little differences, and this is just the things we were talking about. So we'll act like the Czechoslovakians here. We'll put 2 lines out. and the Czechs will sometimes nymph with 3 flies, right? I have never gone to that aspect. I just haven't. It's just I don't think I need to go and lose $15 or on one bad hookup. But the only thing I'm doing differently, and it's probably been in the last 4 or 5 years, and it came from a friend in Tennessee. I'll fish that first fly, our big rubber leg stone or something like that. I will come with my dropper off the eye of that hook. And the only reason I do that is that if a fish is to eat here, right, that hook is captured. If he's coming on a different way, he might get caught on that monofilament of that trailer, where this hook is exposed, right? He can eat without that monofilament being tied on here. So I fished this way for years, I fish this way now, I don't think I've caught more fish one way or another. It's just that brain thing that happens to you that goes, oh, that makes sense to me, that, this hook doesn't have anything tied on it. If he's going to eat it, I'm going to get pure hook on the fish now, instead of if he decides to eat this, he's got to contend with that little piece of tippet. So no difference. So the second fly is dropped off here, same kind of deal. Indicator, I'm probably a little bit less than this because I'm putting weight on. And I was going to ask Mike, how does he cast this? Some of my best friends who fish Colorado are fishing these 2 times length leaders, and they're casting straight upstream to straight downstream.
And I do that more than Andy does. Andy does a little bit more like a Czech style, I believe, where you hit the deep holes, you lob it up, and you're doing this, you're keeping that rod tip out.
Exactly.
And as a more of a dry fly fisherman, I tend to like a nice long nymph drift, keeping that lug on the bottom of the water as long as I can. So I'll cast that double nymph rig, 30, 40 feet upstream and get that long drift through a nice riffle section if it's the right time of year to be in that water. And so there's just so many different ways to do it.
And that's the reason I probably fish this way more is also being a guide. If I can keep you with less line out of the tip of your rod, you get in trouble less, right? For the most part, new beginners cannot throw a 30 or 40 foot cast with an indicator, a split shot, and 2 flies. That's disaster. That's frustration. I don't want to come back again. This is frustrating. I go out by myself. The person goes out by themselves and they're twisted up. They break off. Got to tie back on, break off, tangled up. Too much stuff going on. So if I can have 5 foot of fly line out the end, my 2 nymph rig, and stand from here to the rock and do this, as long as we're in broken water, that fish is going to stay put, and I can be stealthy enough to stay away from them, but I can be this close to them. As you lengthen, I lengthen that too. As I lengthen casts, I lengthen that as well.
And just for the sake, since we showed 2 of the 3 most popular ways to rig this, the third most probably common way is when you come down to your tippet here. What guys will do is they'll tie a piece of tippet on sometimes.
Oh, that's right.
And so you'll have your tippet knot here, and then you'll create tag ends, and one of those will be to a fly that's going to be down here, and the other one will be a little shorter to a fly right here.
Yep.
So you can use that tippet knot to create like just a double line.
So is that what you'd call a dropper?
Technically, I would call them all droppers.
They're all droppers off of a leader line. So that's, those are the basic ways to do it. There's variations on that as well.
You're right.
But so here, loop to loop, again, beginner thing. It's very easy to make this connection with loop to loop. And that's the way you should do it. If you get leaders tangled up and you've got to change line often, and that happens when you begin, for the most part, as you get more comfortable with casting and the way you fish and the style that you fish, my thought is always to take knots out of the situation. Every knot is tied by us, right? It's a weak point. There's error in the ability of knots. So I try to take as many knots out of the system as I can. So my leader would be knotted directly to my fly line. Okay? The only knot in it would be on the first fly and the second fly. If I could do that. And then, as I break off, then I got to put tippet on, and that adds an extra knot. But I've seen people to do loop to loop here, loop to loop tippet. You're adding knots to the system, and we tie those knots, and it takes time to tie those knots. So if you just, if the fish are eating like mad, right, and you've got to tie 4 knots. And then your first cast goes up in the tree behind you because you forgot that it was there, and you got to tie those 4 knots again. That's just another thought because I've been there.
He wants to know how you tie that knot to the eye. You just tie it like you're tying a fly on.
I'm running my same tippet as Mike was, 12 to 16 inches. So there's 2 knots through the same eye, right? So they both go through the eye of the first fly instead of tying it off the bend. Now, I vacillate back and forth on this. I really do. I do it.
I'll be honest with you. A lot of what I do is based on it's easy for me.
Yeah.
And I would never debate which way is better because I don't know, and I don't know if I even care. But this is just way easier for me to get sorted out super quick than that would be for me.
Gotcha.
So yeah, Andy's way might be actually vastly more efficient way to catch trout for all I know. But
catching and fishing, 2 different
animals
right. too.